All right, so if you're thinking about a new phone, you got to be wondering iPhone or Android. Which one's better for security and privacy, in 2024? We're going to try to figure that out today. And to help us, we've got this blog post from December 7th called iPhone versus Android. What's the difference and which is safer?
Yeah, that's the question everybody's asking, especially with all the changes happening in tech these days.
For sure. So let's start with like the core difference between iOS and Android.
Well, it's two completely different approaches. With
Mhm.
iOS, it's what we call a closed system. Apple controls like everything, the hardware, the software. They decide which apps can even get in the App Store. They decide when updates go out to everybody.
So it's like a super controlled environment,
Oh.
almost like a gated community or something.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. And then you've got Android, which is open source. So companies like Samsung or Google can tweak it. It means you've got way more choices, but it also means there's more ways for things to go wrong.
Okay, so one's a gated community, the other's like a giant open market. How does that affect security?
Let's look at iPhone first. Because it's closed, Apple can really clamp down on security. They're really strict about which apps can get in the App Store, so there's a much lower chance of getting malware.
Makes sense. Fewer ways for the bad guys to get in.
Exactly. And since Apple controls the updates, everyone gets security patches quickly. You're not waiting around for different companies to release them.
Yeah.
Plus, you've got stuff like iMessage and FaceTime with end-to-end encryption, so even Apple can't see what you're saying. It sounds pretty good on the surface.
Sounds pretty secure, all right. But I'm guessing there are some downsides. What are those?
Well, one thing that's a bit iffy is the iCloud backups. Some stuff on Apple is encrypted end-to-end, but your iCloud backups, they aren't automatically encrypted, and those backups have a ton of your info. You have to actually go in and turn on advanced data protection to encrypt them, and most people don't even know that's an option.
So you've got to dig into the settings to get the full protection. What about the idea that a closed system could be too closed? Like for people who are more tech savvy.
That's a good point. You don't have as much freedom to change security settings or install third-party apps that give you more control. Some people find that annoying.
So you're giving up some
Right.
control for that out-of-the-box security.
Out-
Okay, let's talk about Android. What are its strengths when it comes to security?
Android has its own ways of protecting you. You've got Google Play Protect, which is always scanning for bad apps in the Play Store. It's not perfect, but it helps. Most Android phones have encryption too, so if you lose it or it gets stolen, your data is protected. And some companies like Samsung, they go even further. Their Knox platform adds even more security features.
Okay, so there's definitely some security measures in place. But we talked about that open market aspect of Android. Where do the risks come in there?
The biggest risk is that you can download apps from anywhere, not just the Google Play Store, and those apps haven't been checked as carefully, so you're much more likely to get malware.
Like go to the dodgy part of the market.
Yeah. And the other problem is that there are so many different Android phones and companies making them that updates can be delayed or sometimes they just never come. That leaves a lot of phones open to attack.
So more freedom and flexibility, but maybe less security. That's got to be a tough choice for people.
It is. This blog post says it's not really about which phone is perfectly secure. It's more about figuring out how much risk you're okay with and how you use your phone. And there are things you can do to make either platform more secure.
Right. So what are some practical tips for people who want to make their iPhone or Android phone more secure? We'll talk about that right after a quick break. All right, so we've talked about the good and the bad of both iPhone and Android in terms of security, but what can people actually do to make their phones safer, like specific things?
Well, for iPhone, one of the easiest and best things you can do is turn on two-factor authentication. Do it for everything. That way, even if somebody gets your password, they still need like a code from your phone or email to get in.
Two-factor authentication.
Mm,
Yeah. It's a bit annoying to set up sometimes, but it's so worth it. You sleep better at night.
definitely. And speaking of sleeping better, if you use iCloud, you should really turn on advanced data protection. That gives you end-to-end encryption for your iCloud backups. You know, all your photos and messages, even health data. So if someone hacks into your iCloud, they still can't see your stuff.
Now that you mention it, what's the difference between the regular iCloud encryption and this advanced data protection thing? It sounds like it's way more secure.
Yeah, it is. With the regular encryption, Apple still has the keys to unlock your data, so technically they could access it if the police ask them to. But with advanced data protection, only you have the keys. Nobody else can get in, not even Apple.
Wow, that's a huge difference. So you're basically deciding how much control you want over your own data.
Exactly. And one more thing for iPhone users. Don't jailbreak your phone. I know it sounds tempting to get all those extra features, but it also disables Apple's security. It's just not worth the risk.
Stay on the straight and narrow, folks. All right, let's switch to Android. What are the essential tips for staying safe in that open source world?
The number one rule with Android is always download apps from the Google Play Store. They've really improved their security, so it's much safer than getting apps from those random third-party stores.
Like, don't stray from the main path. Avoid those shady side streets.
Exactly. And just like iPhone, keep everything updated. Your operating system, all your apps. Updates usually have important security fixes. Don't ignore those notifications.
Yeah, it's like leaving your front door unlocked if you don't update.
Okay, and here's something that people ask about a lot with Android: antivirus software. It's not really essential if you're careful about where you get your apps, but if you like to download stuff from those less well-known places, an antivirus can give you extra protection, like having a bodyguard for your phone.
So it's more like an optional extra layer of security.
Good way to put it. Right. So we've talked about how to make both platforms more secure, but there's another part of this whole debate that's just as important, maybe even more so, and that's privacy. It's not just about stopping hackers, it's about who has access to your information in the first place, even when everything's working perfectly.
That's a really important point. So how do iPhone and Android compare when it comes to privacy?
This is where things get really interesting. Apple has made themselves the privacy champions, and they've done some things to actually back that up. For example, they introduced app tracking transparency. That means apps have to ask permission before they track you across different apps and websites.
Yeah, I remember that. A lot of companies weren't too happy about it, especially the ones that depend on all that user data.
Yeah, it caused some trouble. But it gave users way more control over their data, which is great for privacy. Apple also tries to minimize the data they collect in the first place. And they've even designed their chips with security in mind, so it's harder for hackers to break in.
So they're building privacy into everything, hardware and software. What's Android doing about privacy?
Google has done some stuff too. They have this thing called the Privacy Dashboard, which shows you what data apps are using. But honestly, Google's whole business model is built on collecting user data. They use it to personalize ads and improve their services.
It's that trade-off, right? They give you amazing free services, but they get to use your data. How do you even balance that?
It's really tough. It all comes down to your personal values and what you're willing to compromise on. With iPhone, you get a more private experience, but less control and flexibility. With Android, you can customize more, and you have more apps, but you might give up some privacy. Neither one's really better. It's about what's important to you.
This reminds me of something. Remember that big security flaw they found in the iPhone's image processing unit a while back? Hackers could get your data just by sending you a photo.
Oh, yeah. That was a big deal. Even Apple, with all their focus on security, can mess up. It showed how important it is to keep up with security news and keep your phone updated no matter what kind you have.
For sure. And there was that problem on Android with those apps that came pre-installed on phones. They had access to way more data than they should have. So you got to be careful about app permissions.
Absolutely. No matter what phone you use, you have to be involved in protecting your own information. You can't just trust the operating system to do it all for you.
So we've talked a lot about security and privacy, but there's more to choosing between iPhone and Android than just that. What else should people be thinking about?
Yeah, this blog post goes into some other things that people care about, like customization options, the apps you can get, and even how much they cost.
Okay, let's talk about those. Customization. I bet Android wins that one.
You got it. Android is way more customizable. You can change how it looks, add widgets, even change the actual code if you want. It's like a dream come true for people who like to tinker.
It's like you have all the tools and you can build your own digital world. What about the apps? Any big differences there?
There are a few. Apple's App Store is known for being really picky. They have strict rules about quality and security, so developers often make their apps for iPhone first, and those apps tend to be better and smoother.
So it's harder to get your app on the App Store, but that means the apps are generally better.
Exactly. And there are some apps that you can only get on iPhone, at least at first. But Android has way more apps in total. You can almost always find an Android app that does the same thing as an iPhone app, even if it's not quite as good. So it depends on what apps you use and how much you want that polished Apple experience.
Right. Okay, now for the big one. How much do they cost? That's what stops a lot of people.
Yeah, iPhones are expensive. Everyone knows that. Apple makes all the hardware and the software so they keep the quality high, but they also charge a lot for it. You're paying for that seamless experience and that Apple brand name.
It's like buying a fancy car. You get the best of everything, but it costs a lot. What about Android?
With Android, you have more options. You can get cheap phones and really expensive ones that are just as good as iPhones. That's because it's open source so companies can compete on price. There's a phone for every budget.
So Android is better if you don't want to spend a lot of money.
Yep. And one more thing to think about. Battery life and charging. Android phones usually have bigger batteries and they charge faster. iPhones are good at saving battery, but you might have to buy a special charger to make them charge faster.
So Android wins on battery, but iPhone might last longer on a single charge.
Pretty much. So there's a lot to consider when you're choosing a phone. It's not just about security and privacy. It's about finding a phone that fits your life, your budget, and what you like in a phone.
It's true. It's been great to go through all this and really understand the differences.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who are trying to decide what's the most important thing to remember, yeah, I mean, we've really gone deep on this, haven't we?
Yeah.
From how iOS and Android are built to all the details about security and privacy customization and even battery stuff. So if you're listening to this and you're trying to decide on a new phone, what's the biggest takeaway? What do you really need to remember?
I think the main thing is there's no right answer. Like, both iPhone and Android have good things and bad things. The best choice depends on what you want and what's important to you.
It's not about saying one's better. It's about what's the best fit for you.
Right. Think about how comfortable you are with tech. If you just want a phone that works right away and you're really worried about security and privacy, iPhone might be the way to go, especially if you don't care that much about customizing it.
It's that simple, easy experience we talked about.
Yeah. But if you like having more control and you want more options for price and features, then maybe Android is better for you.
And you're okay with spending a bit more time setting up your security and being careful about the apps you download.
Exactly. It's a trade-off. But it's one that a lot of people like because they get more control. And remember, both iPhone and Android can be secure and private if you use them the right way. Keep learning about the risks, keep your software updated, and be careful about what apps you install and what permissions you give them.
So you're saying it's important to take charge of your own digital safety and privacy.
Definitely. And I'd say one more thing. Don't be afraid to try something new. If you've always used iPhone, maybe try using an Android phone for a week and see how you like it. Or the other way around. You might be surprised.
That's a good idea. Sometimes you don't know what you like until you try it. So if someone's still not sure what to do, what's like the one question they should ask themselves?
I think the best question is, what's the most important thing to me in a smartphone?
It sounds simple, but that's a really good question. It helps you cut through all the confusion and figure out what you really want.
Exactly. Is it security? Privacy? Customization? How it looks? Price? Once you know what's most important, the choice is easier.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, this is our deep dive into the world of iPhone and Android. We talked about everything from the way they're designed to their security and privacy, how to customize them, and even their battery life. We hope this episode helps you decide what phone is right for you.
And remember, no matter what you choose, the most important thing is to stay informed, stay safe, and take control of your own digital life.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. If you have any thoughts, questions, or even just a funny story about your own iPhone or Android experiences, we'd love to hear them. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.